Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy. I'm your host, Paula Jenkins. I invite you to join me as we explore how inspiring people have chosen joy in their lives and what they have to share with us about how to jumpstart joy in the world. Plus, how do we follow our own hearts, find work that lights us up while mindfully noticing the role joy plays in our own journey. Welcome to episode 156. This is Paula Jenkins, the host of Jumpstart Your Joy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I am so glad to have you here. Welcome to October. It's really exciting. I can't believe we're this far along in the year. And as a direct response to some of the things that are going on in the United States right now, I have chosen to pull together a series of episodes that I wanted to air that are all about taking care of you, how to better nourish yourself, nurture what you need, kind of lean into self-care. Well, I'm not a really big fan of that term. It just means taking better care of yourself, and how to be more courageous and speak up for what you need in these kinds of times where I know a lot of people are feeling hurt and angry, and the list goes on and on about the emotions that are coming out of so many people right now, myself included. And so I felt like it would be very helpful to have this kind of series of interviews to go back on and maybe learn some new tools or revisit some things you already knew to help you get through these times and also to bolster yourself for the months ahead. So this week on the show, we're revisiting the interview with Debbie Augenthaler. She is an author and a psychotherapist. She wrote the book, You Are Not Alone, which is the perfect way to kick off this month of self-care and nurturing. What I loved about this interview is how Debbie shares, both from a very personal standpoint, how loss and grief can impact a person. She lost her husband, Jim, rather unexpectedly. She also now works with people who are going through grief in various stages. And I think a lot of what we are feeling in the U.S. has the same markers of grief. And so there's a lot to learn. I also want to send out the message to everyone. The title of the book, You Are Not Alone. If you are feeling lost or confused or upset or any number of those things, I want you to know too that you are not alone in those emotions. It is a hard time, and a lot of people are feeling that way. So I want you to take that to heart and know that you are not alone right now. If you want to find the show notes for this episode, you can head on over to the show notes at jumpstartyourjoy.com/Debbie. And you can also check out the website there while you're there. 155 other episodes with ideas on how to bring more joy to your life and the world. In addition to these episodes, I'm also excited to share some of the things that I've been doing to try and get back in touch with the things that feel more centered to me and like a better place to rest and how to get a break from some of the political noise. And it is more than noise because obviously there's some real implications to everything that's going on, but each of us does need a break. You know, it's not good for you to be in the thick of it all the time. So a couple of the things that I've done, I really love the book Daring Greatly. It is by Brene Brown. I'll put the link in the show notes. If you have not read it, I really recommend it. There's also a really lovely interview with Brene on the Oprah Winfrey, one of her podcasts, which I'll link up to you guys for you guys as well. It's a really interesting conversation that they recorded when she released another book, Rising Strong, which I also strongly recommend. But there's some really good things in there that spoke to me during this time. So I hope you can take some of those things if you wanted to share some of the ways that you're finding peace or joy or a break. I would love to hear them. You can email me at jumpstartyourjoy@gmail.com. Or I'm also sharing some of these ideas on Instagram, and you can connect with me there at Jumpstart Your Joy. So let's get on to this interview with Debbie Augenthaler. Today, you guys, I'm so excited to have Debbie Augenthaler on. She is the author of You Are Not Alone. Welcome to Jumpstart Your Joy, Debbie.
Thank you so much, Paula. I'm thrilled to be here. Delighted.
I'm so excited to have you here. Would you like to tell us what you loved most as a child or in school? What were your earliest sparks of joy?
I was my dad was a Marine, and we were stationed every couple of years. We had to move a lot, and I say that only because you had to make new friends every couple of years and that kind of a thing. And I found books at an early age. I started reading really early. My parents read to me, and the thrill of opening up a book and like entering a whole new world of discovery, or reading about, I loved biographies. I loved anything that took me like someplace new and different. Because, when you first move to a new place as a child, it can be hard at first. And I got very good at making friends, and I enjoyed it. And it was a great way to learn how to connect, as I'm a therapist now, like you're connecting with people and things like that. But I think that there was a joy. I was thinking about it, and I just remembered going to the library. And I actually wrote a post about it last year on one of my blogs about books and how important they were to me as a child, and how it opened up the world for me. So I would say that. And then a purely just delight type of moment, body surfing waves that I thought at the time were enormous, but maybe they were like 2 feet high, my parent would but just floating on the water and rushing and being brought up by the wave to the sand. So I would say those two things they're different, but both very joyful.
Yes. Oh, yes. Body surfing is a lot of fun.
It is. As an adult, I still enjoy it. It still brings me
It's so good. Yeah. And I can relate to that moving a bunch. My dad was not it. Well, the funny thing is I was born at the Air Force Academy, but then we moved because my dad went to retail. Anyway, we moved a lot. And that thing of getting into a new school and making new friends, I think it's an interesting skill set as a connector. Yes. And I don't know, chicken and egg, I don't know what came first there, but it certainly sets you up.
It certainly does, doesn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now you are a psychotherapist who specializes in trauma, loss, and grief. And would you tell us how you got into that? It seems like the journey there is probably a very interesting one.
Well, it is an interesting one, and it's probably, I will tell the short version, obviously, for the podcast, but I always had an interest in psychology and what makes people tick and who they are, what drives people. And because I think, as we talked about, in my childhood, just meeting so many different types of people in different areas of the country and the cultural aspects of all that. But I fell into the financial industry almost by accident as right out of high school. I didn't have the traditional route. I didn't go right to college after high school. I worked, and then I ended up going to college later on in my 20s and got my undergrad and minored in psychology. So I always had that interest in the background. And I had, my book is about, my husband died suddenly when I was in my mid-30s and unexpectedly, and I was with him, and it was hugely traumatic, and I had a therapist who was just so wonderful and so instrumental in helping me understand, I don't even know if understand is the right word, but just holding that space for me and helping me through this really difficult time. And then and I was still seeing her, and then 9/11 happened, and I was working in the financial industry, and I knew a lot of people who died that day. And I was one of the few people that in a certain age group, I was still quite young, and that had something happen, like sudden loss of a loved one. And so I found that I could be with people who were going through something just utterly unimaginably horrible. And I was in shock and obviously grieving too, but I wasn't afraid of their grief. I wasn't afraid to be with them. I wasn't afraid to hold their hand and look them in the eye and hug them. And a lot of people are afraid of grief. We live in a grief-phobic society, I think. And so just that, and even though it took a few more years before I left the financial industry and became a therapist, that really, as I write in my book, that those two experiences really caused me to take a big step back and really reassess and find the courage to leave something that was, safe and known, and take that plunge into going back to school. I had to go to grad school and then get my license and do all the training and just really turn everything around just so I could become a therapist. Because in the end, I wanted to help people like my therapist had helped me. If it's even just one person, I thought if I can help one person come from grief to gratitude, grief to joy, then I will have accomplished, I will have done something wonderful, and it brings me great joy working with people, knowing that, I have the tools and ability to help them do that. So I guess, that's how it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much depth and beauty in that. I mean, and the courage, my own story, and even I say the birth of this show is from a very similar space, which is I went through a traumatic experience during the birth of my son, and wanted something more. Like I knew I was in that space of not lost because he was alive, but that traumatic experience that comes out of something, and just there was something in my soul that said, this is not all there is. You cannot be stuck in this space. What else is there? And I call that was like joy reaching out to me. Like I had to say yes and had to go towards it. And so it's like that moment. And so like, I don't know, I got goosebumps when you were talking about, it's that moment that like this show is about. Like, how do you face that thing, whatever it is for the person listening, and say, okay, I'm saying yes to this wildly improbable idea that I'm getting out of this. I'm going to, by my own strength, find my way out. And so mine also involved going to a therapist and then realizing there's so much more, and there's such breadth on the other side and a depth of emotion that now I can feel and understand. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. And I just wanted to say, I love how you say that it was joy reaching out. That instead of reaching out for joy, right? Joy reached for you. And I like to think of it, I'm getting goosebumps because it's like that calling. It's a calling, really. And, people call that. We hear it, oh, I was called to do this. I've been called, or, called to service or whatever that is. But it's joy reaching out. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and it's been one of those things. I sensed this in your book, which is so beautiful, that some of the journey, it's so interwoven of this personal experience, but then also this greater calling or sense of purpose that comes out of the experience that makes you say yes to, okay, I'm not afraid to help people in that space because I've already been there and seen it. And I love the tenderness in which you approached the way that you speak to people. So would you explain, because obviously I've read the parts of the book and know it, but could you explain how you formatted your book? Because I think it's interesting from a formatting perspective, but how it also layers in the pieces where you're reaching out to offer people, I mean, both solace, but help and encouragement.
Right. Well, what I wrote the book because I feel that, I wanted to help more people than I could one-on-one in my therapy practice. And when people have a traumatic event, as you described, it doesn't have to be the loss of someone you love. Any traumatic event that is that might cause a life-altering loss, and it can even just be a loss of, quote, innocence, in the sense, like you said, the traumatic event around the birth of your son. Like you may have never had like a really terrible event before in your life, so there's a loss of that. Right now, suddenly you have this, so it's a life-altering event for you because it caused you to really shift what your passion and focus might be in your life, right? So I feel that none of us are born knowing how to cope when we are faced with an event like that. We're just not. We're not born knowing how to cope with grief, and it's something that has to be learned. And so in my therapy practice, when people would come and also not just with my clients, but with friends and family that have gone through losses, I became that person people turn to because who else? Well, I guess Debbie would know because she's been through this. Like I said, my husband dying suddenly, and unexpectedly, and he was healthy. And so I feel that when I was in the room with somebody, so to speak, and I normalize the feeling, because many people feel like they're all alone in their experience because they don't know what it feels like. They feel like has anyone else felt this way? They might feel like they're going crazy. And when I can just, say, no, what's happening to you is a natural response to a tremendous shock. It's natural to feel this way. And when I can just sense the energy shift in someone, you can see this like a relaxing of the muscles in their body and in their face, and like this tiny, even though they may not know it at that minute, but this tiny moment of hope, like, really, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. You mean this is okay? And I feel with the book, so by sharing my story, what I've done is I took universal kinds of experiences in grieving that many people may or may not, many people have experienced. They're similar kinds of experiences. We're all different, and we all experience grief differently. We grieve uniquely in our own way, but we might share these common experiences, and they're not the quote stages or phases, but they are in there too, but grief is not linear, and there's no timetable and no rule book for it. So I thought of times, in my own grieving journey, like things that happened to me that I heard over and over in different ways from other people. And it really helps people to hear of others' stories and how they coped, how they grieved. And I wanted to show the reader that I get it. Like, I've really been there. And so I really went back. And as you know, since you've read the book, each chapter shares a piece of my story, my own personal story, what it was like internally for me, my own experience, with also the next part. So there's the story part, my personal story. And then, as if I was talking to you, I don't write clinically, I don't write densely, I don't write, anything like that. As you know, it's like I'm talking to you, and I'm doing it on purpose because, especially in the beginning, we can't focus and it's hard to concentrate. And I know I didn't want to read a book that was dense. I couldn't find very many books, frankly, because it was 20 years ago. And now there's a lot more. But I think what differentiates mine is that I have the story. And then as from a therapeutic perspective, I'm talking to you like I like to say, like a gentle guide, but maybe things that I would say to a client, like, and just in the process, kind of, I hate the word normalizing, but, making the experience like, this is what's happening to you, and this is okay. Or yes, if someone said this or did that, or this happened, that's a natural thing too. Don't be, and so I try to offer a way to kind of help guide somebody through what they're going. And then I have a third part to each chapter that's very short and simple, called For You. And again, there are things that I would offer to clients or anybody that asks me, but it's little tiny things that can make a big difference. Like just remembering to breathe, be kind to yourself, be gentle, and I talk about other experiences, the what ifs and if onlys. And as you know, if you read it, I get a little bit more into like, if at this particular point in time, this might be happening for you. And if it is, here's something you can do to help. So that's why I formatted it the way that I did. Because again, I want this book to help many more people than I can on my own, one-to-one in my practice. So.
Yeah. And reading it, I've not gone through a loss recently in any way, but I really appreciated that you provided that very comforting and there was something very familiar about it, as opposed to so often, when you read a book about grief, and like you said, it's the stages and it feels very dry. And when you're in a space where probably the thing you want most is just a connection and to be told you're not alone, precisely what your book is doing. Like, no, some of that's just too clinical and academic, and that's not where you're at. So I really appreciated that aspect of it.
Well, I'm so glad, and thank you for saying that. I mean, I remember there was a book that somebody gave me, and I think I threw it across the room. I was just like, I don't want this. Like, nothing. Doesn't anybody? I wanted something that that could witness and validate. Like I wanted somebody that knew it, whether I like what this is, what's happening to me. And I wanted to read somebody else that could say, this is what's happening to you because it happened to me, and,
Right.
and it was really important. So I feel like that it's just really helpful. So essentially, I couldn't find a book to speak to the part of me that needed to know someone else had felt this way and had survived. Right. And the book shows you, like, I share the own transformation that happened for me in my life, my own spiritual transformation, all that, and it happens for everyone in their own way. Right. And many people have grown a lot when they've had a great loss. And I'm not saying this is how you do it or what you have to do. I'm just saying can happen because it happened for me. And so the arc of the book goes from the shock of the first moment, but ultimately I'm very happy again. And I didn't think that was ever going to be possible when it first happened. I thought I would never, ever feel happy. And I have a life filled with joy. So again, when you invited me on the show, it's like, oh, I really like I like talking about joy because, there is that arc. So
there truly is. Well, and it's interesting because I think, one thing is a couple of books, in case somebody is listening with us and they're like, oh, another person that's been on even just recently is Julia Samuel, and she wrote Grief Works. And that's another one, not quite the same as a personal journey, but there's several stories about people she's worked with, and it's beautiful. And I'm wondering, have you read Lament for a Son by Nicholas Wolterstorff?
I have not. Lament for a Son? It sounds okay. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, he's a professor at Yale Divinity School. And so his lens is somewhat of a Christian. I mean, he's a professor at a divinity school, but he lost his son in a climbing accident. And so the processing then of losing a child and it's a very spiritual journey that he talks about. And those are the ones that you guys all feel like beautiful, similar things of ways of looking at grief that are beautiful. But go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say when somebody, gosh, losing a child, that's a terrible, terrible, you can't even, it's a terrible, terrible loss. But I think, when you lose somebody that you love, we all seek to make meaning. You need to make meaning of it. Like, why? Yes. How come? Why? There's all those questions at the beginning. But so you do seek to make meaning, because finding meaning and doing something, like I write about in the book, doing something because you've had this loss that can, in the end, be good in the world, because you want to make meaning and you want to honor that person and you want to honor the love you have and that still lives in your heart, that still is there. And you want to do something, you want to make their lives matter, but you want their life and their death to mean something. And I think it's a very natural, basic instinct that we all have, that we search to make meaning. Like, the kids, the teenagers in Parkland, with what's happening there and this whole movement that they've started, because I'm not saying it happens usually immediately like it has with them, but it's certainly giving them some kind of way to comprehend and make some kind of meaning out of what happened in a good way in the world. And that's, to me, an ultimate expression of joy, in the sense that in the sense that you can take something so terrible and make some really positive, impactful, good change in the world.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting that kind of grief and joy are often bookends for each other. I mean, and the distance between those two bookends could be very close or very far.
That's right.
But yeah, then it often, when you dig in, either in the searching for meaning or, I don't know, in the way that joy just almost demands to be heard.
One of my favorite quotes, Queen Elizabeth said, "Grief is the price we pay for love." So, you celebrate the love. We are, when we grieve, and there's always a place that will carry the grief. Some people say no, but for most people I know, there's always a part of you that will carry that grief, and that's okay. It's really okay. It's not like it rules your life, but in the end, aren't we grateful for the love that we did have, for the experience of knowing, this person, or just that idea? And so there can be, that it is the price we pay for love, because ultimately most of us will lose someone we love, but we're still going to be very grateful for them and joyful about the love we shared. And, you would rather have it than not, right? So I understand that. Yeah, grief and love are just this, it is an arc, but they go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I was, I don't even know why this one's hitting me right now, but I was watching Lord of the Rings with my son and my husband. And there's this moment where the elf, I'm not going to come up with the names right now, but the elf has fallen in love with the human, right? And the elf is, she will live forever unless, she has the potential. And her father, I guess, says to her, like, he will die. He will die either by the sword or by time. He will die and you will lose him. And it's this, I like hit me right in the gut, because I'm like, what does she do? What is her and she can't help but fall in love, right? She can't help
Right.
but follow the joy of it, knowing
Right.
that somewhere along the line that ultimately the story will be that he will leave her, not of his choice. But
Right.
so it was
Right.
just
Right.
an interesting same thing that you're saying, like the grief is the price we pay for love. I mean, it was already built in right there for her, and I don't know where that's
Yeah.
going, but
No, but see, I mean, it's threaded, it's threaded into all the stories since the beginning of time, right? I mean, really, when you look at it, and I mean, if you look for it, you could find it. I mean, that's what I mean. Say thread, you follow the thread, right? But it is almost every story, so to speak, has, like the hero's journey, right? Where you start out and things happen and you go down into the darkness, so to speak, because everything, or the phoenix rising, whatever. But the hero's journey is essentially that, and then you rise up and you've learned lessons and you go from being victim to victor, right? And so I think that's an arc of a book or a story for many people, right? And yeah, it's interesting.
I loved kind of getting back to some of that encouragement and the healing that you explain and follow through the book. And there was the section about the cinnamon toast that just stood out for me. Would you explain that moment and kind of what it meant to you, and what the meaning of the cinnamon toast was?
When I couldn't eat, because okay,
Yes.
well, when you go through any kind of big shock, and for me, it was my husband's death. When your body goes into survival mode, it's an innate instinct. It's the survival mode. You have no control over it. However, your body perceives danger when something happens as a shock like that, like your heart races and you can't, all the stuff, the digestion shuts down, your mouth goes dry, you can't eat, all that stuff that happens, right? And that panic feeling, that's your body preparing for fight, flight, or freeze. Because your body, like again, your brain, it's brilliant. Your body, you can shut down, your body's so brilliant, it knows what to do. And it's preparing you for a fight. Only in this instance, though, you're in a fight just to survive something that at the time feels like you cannot. You're warded, you just can't do it. So for me, I found it very, very difficult to eat. I mean, I just couldn't, I could barely swallow. And I wasn't trained then to understand. I wouldn't have been able to think it anyways, but I didn't know that that's what was happening. But all I know is that I had to force myself to eat anything. And so and everybody's worried and I was losing weight and I'm like, I'm trying. And I think, I write, I know I put in there like, I'd gone back to work by then and they would order me a turkey on whole wheat and I would put a piece of turkey, like everyone's looking like, oh, thank you. I'm trying to eat, but then one night I went home and I just made myself, for some reason, cinnamon toast. It just sounded right. And I just toasted it dark and I put lots of butter and sugar and cinnamon. And I really couldn't taste it as much as it was the smell, and it smelled so comforting. And so it's that craving for some kind of comfort. And so for me, it was just became this ritual where I would make cinnamon toast almost every night that's what I would eat. And it took me a while to eat it, but I made myself eat it. And it just, I knew I had to eat, but I felt there's that smell, the comfort of it all. And I think, and that's why in that chapter, I'm like, find whatever it is that comforts you, and it could be a soft blanket. It could be a warm bath. It could be cinnamon toast. I mean, I also ate marshmallow fluff with a spoon from the jar because anything, because it was easy to swallow, and it was just that kind of thing that was happening. So I think it's that I always want anybody to know who's at that point that like it's okay. And for some people, maybe all they want to do is eat, and they might want to just eat ice cream, and that's okay too. It's however you end up in the end. Just listen to your body, and nothing's wrong with you. And don't let people tell you how you should or shouldn't be. What brings you comfort, what feels right for you. And so I just that was one thing that just stood out for me. And I thought that I remembered that particular story for me and thought it would be a good one to share because I know it happens for a lot of people. I can't eat, or I just want something, that one little thing that can help you feel a little bit of comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I really appreciated kind of that somatic touch point of like, I don't know, there's something so sweet and nourishing about the reminder of checking in and allowing yourself some small comfort because everything else, I mean, at least in my own experience, felt hard. And yeah, like people were expecting me to be one way or another or whatever. And so maybe I'd follow some of those suggestions, also not having yet. I've also since been certified as a life coach, so I didn't know the cues either. But now I get it. Like sometimes, no, I just need to sit down and feel some comfort. And so it's like that really, I don't know. And maybe it's also cinnamon toast is a lovely like childhood memory for me. I loved it. So I was like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
But like,
right.
I don't know.
It's comfort. It smells like a hug. To me, it
totally
smells like a hug.
Yeah.
And so and I also, there are other things, like I said, the warm bath and I wore one of Jim's t-shirts like every night. And it wasn't like a sad, like, oh, it felt good to wear something that it felt good to me. That was comforting to me. And I felt at the time I was embarrassed probably to tell anybody because I didn't want anybody to think I was like, oh, she's sleeping in one of his, that fear of judgment, which I really, really want to stress. Like everybody, whatever you do that feels right for you is okay. And I have since learned that many people will do, sleep in someone's t-shirt or do with that. But again, I didn't know because no one told me. And you don't grow up learning how to do this. So I feel it's important to whatever, if anybody is listening to this, like whatever helps you feel connected, whatever helps you. And yeah, listen to your body, and if you need to lay down and rest, do that. If you have kids, like let people help you. And let people babysit for you and try to find some private time for just where you can just take care of you. It's very important.
Yeah. And I think it is hard because like you said earlier, we're in a society that kind of either doesn't talk about grief or loss very much. And we don't have any sort of ability. We don't have a lot of experience with how to handle it or what it should look like. And like you've said, like there's no specific should anyway, but in there somewhere we kind of are also afraid of grief and loss in a way. And so as a society, it's hard to be grieving in this society right now. So
oh, Paula, I can't agree with you more. This is like one of my big talking points. I swear, I'm not kidding. It's like another reason I wrote the book is because I feel so strongly that we need to be able to have conversations about grief. It's okay to be a griever. It's okay to not be okay, right? It's okay. There's a lot going on in the world, the whole world, all over, right? But we know without having to say, you see the headlines of everything that's happening, not just, on a national level, but like all the natural disasters and everything like that that's happening. And it's just, there are a lot of people grieving because you think of one thing that's happened, the ripple effect, how many people are affected by one headline that you see, right? That you may not be close to, but there are people grieving. And we live in a society that doesn't want to see it. And there's a whole section on my book where it's like, it's not about you, it's about them. And people will at times avoid you or avoid the grief because they'll often do or say inappropriate or hurtful things because they don't know what to say and they're uncomfortable with grief, because it's something look, we live in a state of denial. I mean, Paula, as a coach, that's like, if you don't, if we didn't, it's a good defense to have, in the sense that nobody would be able to walk outside their house every day if we didn't have some sort of denial going on. Right.
Yeah.
But as a therapist, I mean, I know a lot of people have, death anxiety and a fear of death. And so you just shut it down. You just deny it. And that's really one of, that happens. It's a natural thing, and it's okay. But I feel that, over 100 years ago, people lived and died in the home, and it was something that happened, and you grew up and you saw it and you knew it. And now it's not that way. I mean, there's been wonderful advances in medicine, but now people like kind of leave and they go somewhere. And so you don't grow up knowing about it. But again, it's this avoidance of talking about it, because I have a chapter in my book where I write about somebody who was a friend of ours who avoided me. And it was so hurtful at the time, but I've come to understand it's because you represent me. It's like grief is like a disease that people are afraid they're going to catch, and by seeing me reminded them of Jem dying, and it makes you face your own mortality. Yeah. And so people don't want to do that either. And I'm not saying I need to live every day thinking, oh, I'm going to die, but we are all going to die. And so you want to enjoy every moment. You want every moment to be as joyful as possible, because that you just don't know when that's going to happen. But I just wish there was a way to make it okay to be a griever, and for us to be able to talk about it and have it be all right. Because I know I felt like I had to be stoic and I had to be strong, and it was really hard. It was exhausting, because you would go out and put on this face for the world, when inside you feel like I felt like I was, and I write about this too, I felt like I was failing an unwritten societal rule book on how to be on how you should be grieving. And people would be like, aren't you feeling better yet? And I'm like, how do you answer that? Like, am I supposed to be, is it, so it's been 6 months, I'm supposed to be okay now? No one told me that,
Right. And my heart's not saying that. So
no, exactly. So what I'm trying to do with this book is just say, this is what it's like, and it's okay. Grief is not linear. There's no rule book or timetable. And it's also for people who want to help people who are grieving. Like you said, you've read it, but now I hope it gave you some maybe interesting things to think about or things to do. If somebody you love needs it, you might have, better understanding and some ways to help.
Yeah. I mean, it surely does. And I think it's interesting because I mentioned this in a previous episode, actually, when I was talking to Julia Samuel, was like early on because I went to divinity school. That's how I ran into Nicholas Wolterstorff. But one of the things that I have been fascinated with for years is, what do you say when someone says they've lost someone? Someone near them has died, because it always felt like such a difficult thing to have said. Someone else has said that. And then what do you as the recipient of such news say that's not dismissive or, running from news or like, and so, yes, I think like there's something about this discussion of how do we deal with grieving and death that has been fascinating to me for a long time, which of course might seem weird for somebody who loves joy, but I don't think it is. I think it's like, I want, because I want everyone to be as happy as they can, right. But that means dealing with the other side of that. And so how do we embrace people or let them be, or whatever it is, once we know they've lost someone, and not be afraid of the loss?
Well, if you don't know what to say, I mean, clearly if it's somebody that you know and you knew the person who's passed, like you can, you'll kind of know more because I'm so sorry, right? But people say that really is enough, because if you don't know what else to say, if you're fumbling for words, like if you go to a wake or a service or something and, you go to the person and a hug, I'm sorry, that's fine. Because that's all you know. But if you knew the person, you can say, oh my God, he was such a great person. Or really what she did one time, like you can share a story. But because people, when someone you love dies, like they still live on in you always. And you want to be able to talk about them and not act like, okay, now that they're dead, we can't ever talk about them again. But in the very beginning, A simple I'm sorry is fine. Don't feel the need to fill in unless it's something that's, genuinely sympathetic. Like, I am so sorry. What can I do? I want you to know I'm going to be calling you in a couple, I'll come back in a couple of weeks. Like, if it's somebody you don't know that well, but you're going to receiving line, but try to support people, like offer help. But we're going to go back to answer your question there at the beginning. What do you say? I'm sorry. What a terrible thing. Something like that. And just acknowledge it. Don't not acknowledge it, or don't try to say something to fill in space that feels awkward, because the grieving person can be just overwhelmed, obviously, or in shock, and will really appreciate you're saying I'm sorry. Because what more can you do, really? You can't do anything with words at that moment. But I really feel that trying to fill it in, I mean, for an example, at one of my husband's wakes, because there were 4, because he was young, like I said, there was a lot of people that came. But somebody said to me, you're really young, you're going to meet somebody and get married again at his wake. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And it wasn't meant to hurt me, but it was meant to try to comfort me. But it didn't comfort me. It was the wrong thing to say, but
Yeah.
And so that's why people get flustered. And what do I say? What do I not say? So I feel that, if you're feeling uncomfortable with what to say, just say, I'm so sorry. And then the next thing you do is more than what can I do? Call, if your friends, if you know them well enough to call or email or whatever, and say, I'm going to the store. Can I pick you up something? Or just show up at their house, which, people often do with food and stuff like that. But, you can bring like paper products, like things that people don't even think about. Just pick up like things you might need every day. If the people have kids, offer to take the kids to give them some time, and don't stop offering support in the first couple of weeks. Like lots of times people will say, no, I'm fine. I don't need anything. Well, they don't know what they need in the first few weeks. They don't know. And if it's been 2 months, call them still. How are you today? What can I do for you today? And just because someone has said no once doesn't mean it's an always no. It means it's a no in the first few days, right? But I can, in those first few days, you're overwhelmed. But you want to know, even if you want private time to be alone, you still want to know people are there that care about you and support you. And you can just even say, I'm thinking of you. You don't have to say, how are you? You can say, I'm thinking of you today. That's, and that's a nice thing to do. And I would say to anybody, send a card. You can send an email too, but a card or a note that if you have a memory like that you want to share of the person that's passed is so meaningful. People love that. It offers a lot of comfort, because oftentimes, you may have had an exchange with the memory, a special something. He was so funny when he did this, or one day he did something so nice for me. And I mean, I read these things over and over, and the person that sent it didn't know that, but it offered me a lot of comfort. And I know, working with people that I have, that's very meaningful. So and listen. That's the other thing I have to say.
Listen.
Yeah.
I saw one of our, a friend, I think she was mid 40s, passed away suddenly, and in the age of Facebook, it just happened very organically that people started posting to her page all these beautiful memories, because she was, really well loved. She's a DJ in the area, so she knew a lot of people. And so it was really beautiful to see people putting in these tiny memories. We'd worked with her. We had like a great memory at a club with her, or like,
right.
But, and then her husband's on the page and can see it too. And it was just like, it was like a living memorial. And I'm sure you get the sense that all of us were somewhat comforted by this wider picture of Stephanie, that like we wouldn't have all known just from the one bit of her we knew, but that in a wider sense, she had impacted all these people. I mean, it kind of makes me choke up just thinking about it, because it was so lovely. So I think however you can help, if somebody saw somebody, to help fill in those gaps, because
that's right.
It's beautiful. And it was so neat to see it happen.
Beautiful. What a beautiful tribute to her. And I see that happen more and more now on Facebook. And if that's the way it happened, I think it's, if people can add to that, it's beautiful, because her family will read that, right? And it offers a lot of comfort, because people want to know, like, oh, you saw, like, of course I thought she was special, right? I'm her husband and I loved her so much, but you look at how many other people's lives she touched, And it's like a big, huge hug from a big community of people who love someone special to him. And so I think that's beautiful. And it's a celebration of life, it's a celebration. And so I like that example a lot, Paula.
Yeah. Yeah. It was touching to see. So I don't know if it happens all the time that way, but it is, and it was nice. Well, so if people are curious about your book and where they can find out more about you, where are you and where can they pick up your amazing book?
Thank you. It's on the book. Well, I have a website, and it's www.debbieaugenthaler.com. And that's DebbieAugenthaler. And it's on Amazon. It's available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. You Are Not Alone, a heartfelt guide for grief, healing, and hope. And I also have a Facebook page. It's called Grief to Gratitude, and we provide daily inspiration. And I have to say this because it made me so happy. It was just so gratifying. But a woman posted a review of the book because it was only published a week ago. But she said, I follow Debbie on Facebook, and she's helped me through some times. And, and I don't know, she's a follower on the page. And I just love that the page is helping people, with the daily, again, with just like quotes and some writings on just getting through, right? But kindness, courage, hope, support, that type of a thing. And it's really grown. So I'm really glad that that's reaching people. So I would like to mention that also for anybody who might want to have like a daily dose of inspiration.
I love it. And I'll link up to those in the show notes as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's like a hug. I just loved it.
Thank you, Paula.
Of course. Yeah, it's a treat. And our last couple of questions is where have you seen resistance come up in your life, and how have you, I used to say overcome it, but how have you worked with it?
Well, I think you almost answered it at the very beginning when I talked about like my education and leaving my, doing the change from the financial world into this world, and how was I going to go about doing it, and finding the courage. And I think, so there was a resistance within, like, how do I leave the known, which is all I've ever known, to do this that I really want to do? Like, how do I make that happen? Because you can't just say, oh, I'm going to do this now. It required going back to grad school and leaving my job and my secure job, and then the years as an intern and getting my license out. I mean, it was a big, huge, commitment. And so the resistance within to overcome that fear of what if. I use this term in the book, but the what ifs and if onlys. What if I do this? But if only I had done that, and And so I had to work. It took us several years to find my way from to have a smooth transition and find my way and figure out how I was going to do it. And so I did overcome it by just having the thought that if I didn't do this, I would regret it the rest of my life. And Henry Thoreau, this great quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." I mean, he wrote it 150 years ago. But I thought, am I going to be a quietly desperate person if I don't follow what my heart's telling me to do? It was overcoming all of that and just deciding I really had to go for it. And so, I had to also, everybody who knew me was like, what? You're going to do what? What? How can you do that? Like, you would be a good therapist, but my God, how are you going to do all that? And so I had to kind of just put on blinders almost and just really follow my heart, listen to, my gut, and we can call that God, spirit, whatever you want to, but, really following and having faith that it would work out. So I feel like that was how I overcame that, is I just had to talk myself into it. I don't know how does that happen? I mean, right? How do you, you just have to like start saying what's the most important thing to me? Like, how am I going to, and it would be, I didn't want to be at the end of my life saying, why didn't I do that? Why, like, have this one big regret? So.
Yeah. And there, I mean, yeah. And then it's saying yes.
Mm-hmm. Saying yes
again
to it.
And again.
Saying yes to it. And I've come up that the people talk about jumping into the abyss, right? And I thought, well, it could be free falling or it could be free flying. So I like to think I jumped in and went flying, not falling. And so I like to think of it like that. Yeah. So
I love that. And last and most joyfully, what are 3 ways that you can think of to jumpstart joy in your life, in the world, or in other people's lives?
Well, as you know, that's what I do, try to give that bit of hope. And I think that's always a moment of joy when you can discover hope, right? So I start with, for me, I meditate every day. And after I do, I always have a little bit of a gratitude, just a minute or two practice, but what I'm grateful for. And that reminds me, of that brings joy to have a number of things that I'm grateful for, and to, have more things I'm grateful for than I have time to, and that is a wonderful thing to do. I highly recommend that. And being kind to yourself and to others. If you're kind to yourself, then you grow a much larger capacity to hold kindness and give it to others. And you don't know, the smallest gesture of kindness to one person, you don't know how many people that can impact. The ripple effect can be amazing. So just even if you smile at somebody on the street, right? And I live in New York City, and not many people go, but I try, it's amazing when you see someone and you just smile, like a little smile of hello, or connection, their faces brighten up. And I think, but holding the door for somebody, just doing something small. If I try to do a little something like that every day, because that brings joy for me, and I feel for others. And I love walking through here. We have the park, and I'm lucky enough I can be in other places at times, but being in nature, oh my gosh, when the sun's shining, and now spring is finally coming, and there's huge joy in those few minutes of like, oh, it just the birds are out, the flowers are opening, and I am just ready, and so yeah,
I love that. Thank you so much, Debbie. It's been such a treat to get to have you on the show, and what a great conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Paula. I thank you. I'm delighted to have been invited, and I really enjoyed talking with you.
Debbie, thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing your story. And if you guys want to read this book, I enjoyed it, and it really is a deep and meaningful book. I really appreciate that she bounces back and forth between her story, but also these really beautiful snippets of things that you can do if you are feeling, in the midst of grief. And so much of what we're going through right now is also similar to grief. It's overwhelming. And so I hope that you will check out the book if it feels like it speaks to you, and that you'll also reach out to some people in your life if you're feeling the need for connection, because you are not alone right now either. So if you want to find the show notes for this episode, you can find them at the website at jumpstartyourjoy.com/Debbie. And there will be links there for you, and along with a couple of things that I've been doing to kind of bolster me through these times as well. So if you want to be in touch with other ideas on things that you're doing, you can email me at jumpstartyourjoy@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I hope that you'll come back next week when there is another great interview to share all about how to advocate for yourself in times like this. So until then, I hope that your days are filled with so much joy.